Welcome to A Reason for Hope, your question connection with the entire Word of God. We would love for you to join in our conversation. Simply follow us on our Facebook page at Calvary Christian Fellowship of Tucson. If you have a question, email or text us at questionsforhope@gmail.com. Now here's your host, pastor, author, and Bible teacher Scott Richards, along with his right-hand man, Sean Richards.
Well, a very good afternoon to you, and welcome to this edition of A Reason for Hope, your question connection with the entire Word of God. Sean was looking at me that way because my mic cord was over my microphone and made a scratchy noise. But apart from scratchy noises, we are delighted that you're here today to join us in our journey through God's Word, one question of the heart at a time. Any Bible question that you have, we would love to be able to explore it with you on the broadcast here today. A question about a passage in the Bible you'd like to explore, personal issues in your walk with God, perplexing questions asked you by skeptics or non-believers. We are all over these sort of things. Biblical prophecy, the current controversies that can swirl about us both inside and outside the church. We would love to hear from you because it's your questions that determine the content of each and every edition of A Reason for Hope. So if you are joining us on Facebook, be sure to log in on our comment corner. If it's your first time visiting us on Facebook and you are looking at us through a laptop, you will notice on the lower left-hand side of the screen there's a little icon that says Bible Question and Answer. Just click on that and our comment corner will come up for you. On the right-hand side, you can log in, let us know that you're watching, and get your questions to us. Any question about the Bible, welcomed here, and we are looking forward to seeing how the Lord leads and guides the conversation. Joined here by my right-hand man, protege, all-around good guy, Sean Richards. Sean, aside from Facebook and the comment corner, how can people get their questions to us?
Well, first and foremost, you can join, I keep saying that word, our first venue beyond Facebook is our phone lines, 1-877-556-1212 is the number. You'll be sent to voicemail, so if you'd like to leave us your name and your question, we can receive those just as if you were on the comment corner. Also note, for easy access, questionsforhope@gmail.com is our email address, and ScottR4H is our Twitter page. We also have a YouTube page up, A Reason for a Hope. If you could subscribe there and hit the notification bell, you'll have all these messages on archive through your preferred means of getting your videos. Basically, get that sort of godly input. Good playlists and very, very fine theologians are available there. And if you want to add us to your list, then we'd be honored.
Yeah.
And also noting this, we have a prayer request. As we always want to begin the broadcast in prayer for God to speak, but also for Christopher. It's apparently got a ear infection as a byproduct of a cold. Flu season strikes again. So shall we shoehorn that one in?
Yeah, let's pray and commit the broadcast to the Lord. Father, what a privilege it is that we can not only join together here over the internet, here over the airwaves, but to be welcomed into your very presence, the creator and maker of all things, the high and lofty one who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. Lord, we exalt you and we extol you, and we thank you that even though you are an awesome God and literally hold every atom of this universe together by your amazing will, Lord, you even care about the slightest needs that we have within our lives. And Father, I know that what Christopher's going through right now is not slight in terms of the amount of pain that he has. I pray that you would ease that pain. I pray that you might give the ER doctors an opportunity to be able to minister to him and to take that pain away. God, thank you that we can not only pray for Christopher, but we can pray for all who are within our audience who need your healing touch, myself included. And I thank you, God, that you tell us in Psalm 103 that we can bless you with all our soul because you forgive all our sins, heal all our diseases, ransom our souls from hell, surround us with loving kindness and compassion, fill our lives with good things so that our youth's renewed like the eagles. Lord, we claim those beautiful provisions that you've made available to us. Pour your mercy out on Christopher, we pray, and bless this broadcast and guide and direct us and give us wisdom, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
While we're on that topic, a very interesting issue as far as history is concerned, definitely will be handy for those listening. Where did the idea of hospitals and orphanages come from historically?
Well, essentially it rose out of a Christian worldview. Prior to the time of Christ, for instance, the Roman world, the Greco-Roman world and the culture involved with it was a pretty harsh place. Obviously, there was the overview of the Old Testament that laid great stress on taking care of widows and orphans in their distress, but the idea of building hospitals and places where people could pursue healing. Normally, the ancient hospitals were associated with the worship of pagan gods,
or just having a household slave who would do those things.
Yeah, or sometimes they would have a physician on call, if you will. But the idea of being able to provide what we would know today as the current hospital really did emerge out of the idea of reaching out with the love of Jesus. Many people believe that it was Jesus' injunction in Matthew 25 we talked a little bit about yesterday at the judgment at the end of the tribulation when he said, I was sick and in prison and you came to me. The idea of visiting widows and orphans and coming alongside the sick and infirm, praying for them, even laying oil upon them. Laying oil anointing with oil was not just a point of release of faith, but it was also considered medicinal during that time. So this is really where that emerged.
Yeah, and also note that we have records of it basically being a common practice. If a girl was born into a Roman home, or just an unwanted child in general, they would leave them outside, out front, for them to be picking up by stray dogs, and the crying would obviously draw in that kind of attention. The Christians took it on themselves to take these children in, and the concept of orphanages was established.
Right.
But it's also important to note, you said Judeo-Christian. Does this go back to the Old Testament as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, noting in the book of Leviticus and all its intolerance, the emphasis on widows and sarcasm.
Yeah.
The emphasis on
Sarcasm.
the emphasis on caring for the widow and the orphan, for leaving a means of provision in your fields, not shaving off the corners, was to provide for those who were less fortunate. But note that as well, the God of Israel made a very, very keen impact on the cultures in its day, not only in Israel before Christ, but throughout Rome during and after him. So make sure that that's under your belt and that you do further research on this, because a lot of people will say, well, what has Christianity given to the world beyond bigotry, intolerance, hatred, and cultural divides?
You're
and
spending
war?
too many times on those difficult websites.
If it was a different culture, then we'd engage with it where it's at. But this is where we are. So take the equipment and run with it.
Exactly.
Got a question from Mike who wants to know, how do we have faith?
Which dovetails nicely with what we're talking about here.
And trust. Is it simply a decision? I have trouble with it. I seem to default into looking inward instead of outward at Christ. Well, the word faith is a Greek word that comes from the word pistis, which is literally trust. And if you're going to put faith into its most practical form, it would be trust with reason. If you have misplaced faith, you trust something, but for very poor reasons.
Right.
So if I have trust in Christ, it basically hinges on whether or not I have a proper view of him. Is he trustworthy? Is he faithful or full of reasons to trust? So if we're then going to ask the question, what's the difference between faith and, noting this, a doubt, a struggle with trust? It's a very interesting issue, and Ravi Zacharias, as he tends to, had a very good response to this. He says that doubt is different from a question in that a doubt thinks there is no answer. A question is looking for one. If you have questions about Jesus and want to know more reasons to trust him, that doesn't mean that you're doubting. But if on the other hand you do find yourself wondering, are there any reasons to doubt Jesus? Well, we'd recommend his life story.
Right.
And so let's give him a few examples. What reasons do we have to trust not only who Jesus is, but what he claimed to be?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons why we would trust in Christ. First of all, Jesus made some pretty extraordinary statements. For instance, in speaking with some of his most committed opponents in the Gospel of John, he said in John chapter 8 and verse 46, "Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell you the truth, why don't you believe me?" In other words, Jesus laid down the gauntlet. It would be like, say, at one of our political debates, a candidate looking over at their opponent and saying, why wouldn't you vote for me? Well, they'd go, "Oh, wow, great, let me count the ways." Well, the long and the short of it was Jesus laid down just that kind of a challenge, and the result was silence. His enemies had nothing with which to condemn him. The Apostle John and Peter, who lived with Jesus 24/7, both came to the conclusion that in him there is no sin. Boy, you live with me for 24 hours, and you're going to know that's not true about me personally. But, again, Jesus' character. The other thing that we look at is that Jesus did things that no other human being could ever do. He not only claimed to be God, he backed up that claim by exercising power over nature, power over illness, power even over death itself by raising from the dead. But the most important reason that we take Jesus seriously is because he claimed that just as Noah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth 3 days and 3 nights and rise again. He prophesied his own resurrection. Well, again, he has provided for us in the pages of the Bible overwhelming historical evidence of the fact that he, in fact, rose from the dead. The history, the eyewitness testimony, the riddle of the empty tomb, the overwhelming change in the lives of the disciples, the fulfilled Old Testament prophecies, even our own experience with the living Christ, having a personal relationship with him. All these things give veracity to the fact that Jesus is a valid object for our faith. And, Sean, I think you bring up a really good point in that, when we talk about faith, sometimes people get that confused with some kind of mystical experience or, a particular feeling they had at a particular time, or even some circumstance where they were up on a mountain at a camp and they really felt close to God, and they say that's what faith is all about. But faith, as you say, is trusting in something that's a worthy object. I guess maybe, Mike, in order to define what faith is all about, could you imagine what would happen if you were instantly struck faith blind? We've heard about people who are colorblind, but just imagine if you could no longer exercise faith in anything. Well, you couldn't sit down, because how could you know that the molecules that make up that chair are actually going to hold together and support you? You would have no idea whether that was going to happen or not.
How would you be able to communicate? Because how do you know that the language supposedly called English has not been a fabrication your entire life? How could you trust that oxygen isn't poisonous? How could you trust that your autonomous nerve system, your heart, is actually going to keep you alive?
Well, you couldn't even get out of bed in the morning, because how do you know gravity's in session? You can't see gravity, you only see what it does. Well, our experience over time with these things teaches us that we can, in fact, have faith, and we have a huge assumption of faith. There's no one in this world who doesn't exercise faith. The fact that we have relationships with people that we love and just assume they're not out to get us. If we didn't have faith, we would live in a complete state of paranoia. And so, faith, in a sense, I think befuddles us a bit, because we put it up on some shelf and we just say, well, there's these people that either have this, but we all exercise faith. The big question, as you said, is Jesus a worthy aspect of your faith? And, Mike, if you really want to settle that issue, my recommendation would be for you to read, say, More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell. That'd be a great place to start. I wrote a book called Reasonable Doubts: Is Your Faith Built on Fact or Fiction?, which is all about this particular subject and why the Bible does give trustworthy answers to the most important issues of life. You can get a copy of that just by going to our website or coming by Calvary Christian Fellowship, and we have them available for you. But the bottom line is this: the great acronym for faith, forsaking all, I trust Him. I trust Jesus. I trust what he did here on earth. I trust what he taught. I trust the overwhelming reliability that we have of the New Testament eyewitness biographies of him. I trust the work of the Holy Spirit in individuals like the Apostle Paul, who saw Jesus, who Jesus called to be one who would clarify what a relationship with him is all about. But these are acts of faith. It doesn't mean it's like a leap of faith. Oftentimes we think that coming into a relationship with God is a leap into the dark, and we just hope that somewhere out there someone's going to catch us. But it's not a leap into the dark, it's a step into the light. And the more we understand that our faith is based on fact and not on feeling, the more we're going to have that solid foundation. Anything else you'd add to Mike?
Nope, I think that covers it. Just make sure that you're basing that not on feelings but on facts. We tend to confuse the two, especially in today's culture, but make sure that those both have their proper place. You can enjoy reality or question it, but understand the difference between a question and a doubt. That's what we'd fall back on. Got a question from Andrew who wants to know about Logos Bible Software, our opinions on it. It's a very, very good program. Definitely gives you access to the original languages, commentaries, basically like an app that's not unlike Bible Hub, but a little bit more fast-paced and intended for personal study. Some of the people that established it do have interesting views so far as that's concerned. I won't go too much into them, but they're nothing that we would consider dividing fellowship over. When it ultimately comes down to it, we wouldn't say anything against it, and we'd have several things to say for, and that it not only gives God's Word a lot of very in-depth and very precise access to the public, but is also an excellent tool for someone who studies the Bible regularly to look into the other languages, thus Logos, the term in Greek. If you want to check out more about it, logos.com is the website, Logos.
Yeah, and whenever you're considering, say, investing in a program like that, or buying sort of a package deal, or even going on one of the free websites like BibleHub.com, what you may want to do is you may want to take a look at some of the teachers that they highlight and what their background is and where they're coming from theologically. And if that jibes with you in a scriptural sense, then then certainly have at it. Again, Logos will provide a lot of insights and a lot of resources that you just can't get online. They have copyright and proprietary control over certain people's comments and materials. But boy, if you can't afford something like that, there are just wonderful free resources on the internet. One of them we mentioned, BibleHub.com, great resource as far as digging into the original language. Blue Letter Bible, great search engine, has some really helpful different comments and notes from some pretty solid sources available there as well, and also has a Bible dictionary and all this. And the other that I would recommend is EnduringWord.com, Dave Guzik's great website where he gives you a verse-by-verse commentary through the Word with some great links and ways to dive in deeper if you're so inclined.
So let us know if that helps you out, Andrew. Yeah, nothing to say against it, and a few things to say for. The only thing I guess you could say is it's not free, but that is for a good reason. They want to keep the software up to date, and that requires a lot of programmers. So noting a very recent, a very modern, and a very high-functioning Bible study app. They also have lessons on Hebrew and Greek, as well as sermon points and outlines from people who are quite experienced in that area. But just be aware as well when you're receiving comments or commentaries that isn't gospel truth, and you don't need to have an extra level of investment in it because you've invested in it. That's just like the comments you're receiving here. If it lines up with God's Word, great. If not, then as C.S. Lewis says, drop it.
Yeah, not bad. Quite an interesting comment/question from John passed along here. In Acts chapter 2, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit being described there in Romans 8, the idea that we have no fear, but perfect love casts out fear from 1 John chapter 2, that our spirit bears witness with God's Spirit, that we are His children and able to experience Him as Abba Father. What is that experience like in practice? How does that work out practically within the life of a person?
Well, practically, as far as recognizing who God is, I suppose it's just living consistently with that reality. It's not certainly to say sinlessness, but I think if I were to deduce it off the back of my hand, when we're talking about the question, what does the Christian life look like? If I'm understanding, A, I'm no longer going to hell, and B, I have a living relationship with the God of the universe, then I think that goes two different directions. First and foremost, if I have a living relationship with the God of the universe, I should probably want to know more about Him, to know the significance of that very fact. A new believer can enjoy this just as much as a seasoned one, and I think that this would be a good resource to start with, referencing the Bible. The second is understanding I'm not going to hell. Well, that implies not only a rescued status, but also a grateful status. There was something horrible that we were undertaking, and we've now been called out of that. So I think that appears in two ways. Is first, a interest in God's Word and wanting to learn more about Him, to fall more in love with Him and have more reasons to trust Him. And the second, I think, in a practical Christian life is one of gratitude, is just going into your day saying, wow, I can now go closer to heaven, not drift endlessly, ending up in hell. I think those would be the two I can give right now, and if you gave me an hour, I might be able to get more. But anything else?
I guess the whole idea of experiencing God, experiencing His love, His Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are His children, having God speak deeply to our hearts, maybe even communicate to us through prophecy or through a vision or a dream. These are all things that are not impossible within our walk with God. They all have solid scriptural precedent. There are times, for instance, when I'm worshiping the Lord, either privately or corporately at Calvary Christian Fellowship, and there are just times where the Lord just reveals Himself to me in a very profound and a very deep way. Again, that my spirit bearing witness with His Spirit, that I'm His child. Sometimes He'll speak words of encouragement to me by reminding me of certain scriptures and personalizing them to me. The thing that I think we have to be careful of in terms of those experiences is, if you've ever gone to like a charismatic or a Pentecostal church, the goal of the church service is to have that kind of experience. And the worship is pretty much geared towards that kind of experience. And even the teaching itself can be geared towards emotional appeals and so forth, to have people have this sense of, oh, the Lord really moved because I really felt something going on. That's really a very dangerous place to be, because our feelings aren't good or they're not bad. They're just our feelings. And it isn't that God doesn't love to bless us and give us joy unspeakable and full of glory as we consider our relationship with Him. And He does that. But the thing I've found is this. It's kind of like Mark 16 speaks of, when it talks about these signs shall follow those who believe. And then it talks about the various miraculous sign gifts of the Spirit. It doesn't say that those who believe will follow signs. In the same way, when we have these experiences where, kind of heaven opens a little bit and God lifts us up and beyond where we are. And we do have, for lack of a better term, a mystical experience with the Lord, something that really can't be explained apart from the supernatural. That's all well and good, but that's up to God. That's not something that you can fake or imitate or simulate. We do see that at various points, say along the life of the Apostle Paul, for the most part, he shared God's word faithfully and prayerfully and let the chips fall where they may. But there were times, for instance, where Jesus stood before him when he was in Corinth and said, "Don't worry, I have many people in this city." These kind of experiences that we have with the Lord are not beyond the pale, not unscriptural, but where they do get beyond the pale is when we start chasing those sort of signs. We go, oh man, the Lord just really spoke to me in such a way. For example, say I go to a worship service and the songs that are sung are just particularly meaningful to me personally for where I'm at in my life. And I just feel overcome and I just start to weep. Well, that's a beautiful experience of worship in the presence of God. But if I come the next week and sit there and go, oh boy, I can't wait for God to move in my life, so I start weeping again. Well, then suddenly I'm focusing on the weeping, not on the Lord anymore. And God is really notorious about going, no, don't fall in love with the feeling, don't fall in love with the blessing, fall in love with the one who is the source of those blessings. So we have to be very careful about that, but we don't want to go to an extreme one way or the other. There are some people who just say, well, I got my Bible and and I got my prayer time and that's all I need, and so I'm going to pray through the Lord's Prayer every day and read my Bible, and that's my relationship with God, and I don't need anything else beyond that. Well, you may be right. You might not need anything else, but why not let the Lord bless you? On the other side of the coin, some people go, oh man, just people that base their whole relationship just on God's word. I have to have these feelings in my life. I got to have some. Well, you set yourself up, because, the thing about feelings, it's almost like when you first start dating. The first time you hold hands with a girl when you're a teenager, it just feels fantastic but after a while, it just doesn't do the same thing anymore. So you have to keep upping the ante, if you will, to get the same effect. In the same way, if we pursue feelings instead of faithfulness in our walk with God, just worshiping Him for who He is, not necessarily for the way He makes me feel at a particular moment, then, I think we're going to be in a lot more solid ground. And then God can bring those times of feelings, those miraculous manifestations as He sees fit. I'm not following signs, you see, but as I follow the Lord, then these signs are going to follow me in the right proportion, the right measure in my life.
So let us know if that helps you out. Got another question from Mike, and this one's an interesting one. Don't worry, it's not impossible, actually. You just have to define your terms. How did evil come into being? We know God has no evil or creates evil, so how did Satan have evil desires in a perfect heaven with God?
Yeah.
Well, Mike, the question then is, did evil come into existence? Is evil a thing? I believe it was Augustine who wondered, well, is God the author of evil then? Because God created all things, evil is a thing, therefore God created evil. But his premise was false in that he said that evil was a thing. And why is that? Well, the analogy is given by Norman Geisler, who recently has become glorified, and he said, if you take all of the rust out of a car, you have a better car. If you take all the car out of the rust, you have nothing. If I take decay out of a tree, it becomes a better tree. If I take the tree out of the decay, I have void. If I have a cancer and I take all of the cancer out of me, I have a better me. If I take all of me out of the cancer, well, the cancer goes with it too, because that's actually a good thing. It's just cells reproducing falsely. So you ask the question then, is evil a thing, or is it just something that went wrong? Is darkness a thing, or is it just the absence of light? And so you then ask the question, how did evil show up in the first place?
Yeah.
And the answer, simply put, is that God respected an alternative to Himself. And what is He? He is good. And the absence of good is evil.
Yep.
So evil itself is not a thing, it's the absence of good, or what we as Christians would define as God's nature. Now there's other religions and other worldviews that would jump around this issue. Buddhists reject the idea of good and evil altogether, and you can see how well that works out in the caste system. Muslims view Allah's nature as good, which is so far so good, but the problem is the Quran presents Him as arbitrary. So there's no defined set of what good is. Allah can change to be deceptive or to be beneficent on any given time.
Right.
So there's no solid basis for that. But on the other hand, if we look at the Christian God, we see that He is the basis and standard for good at all times, in all ways, and for all people. The question then is, are we in line with that? And if not, we are, by God's standard, evil. And here is the greatest demonstration of that. In Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 12, we're given a description, interestingly, first of the king of Babylon, who was very big for his britches, so to speak, and it was describing his fall from glory due to his pride. But then we make a jump, not just in the context and setting, but while the topic is on pride, the audience, the subject, going from Babylon, but also the setting into heaven. It says in verse 12, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, a reference to angels. I will sit in the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. And God says, one, no, you won't, and that settled the argument. But catch this five I will statements, these five I will statements from this individual, Lucifer. He said that he would not only be better than he would be greater than those around him, even though, noting in Ezekiel, he was perfect in wisdom, perfect in beauty, the anointed cherub who covers. He would be like the Most High. He brought himself beyond reality, which is, in a sense, all that pride is, a dishonest view of yourself and others, and used his exalted status to skew his own perception of himself. Now, pride has been called the anti-God mindset because it inverts everything in on itself. It makes you, instead of looking at the value of God's creation, how well it suits you. Instead of looking at how good God has been to you, you look at God as someone who owes you something, that you deserve his blessings, that he's in service to you. It leaves no room for anyone but yourself. And so when Lucifer presented this fallen characteristic, he demonstrated the first noted act of evil in that he separated himself from God, which is the definition of evil. Evil wasn't created, but it was introduced by one basic rule. It is not good to force people created for relationships into those relationships. God can't violate his own nature. He can't not be himself. So if I ask myself the question then, if angels are capable of accepting or rejecting a relationship with God, if humans are capable of accepting or rejecting a relationship with God, then what kind of God would make it so that there was no way for them to achieve that? What kind of God would make it so that we were coerced into that kind of relationship without respecting the alternative? That's why the fall happened. That's why Lucifer was able to reject God. And note, this is going to tie into a future question as well, but why he still has access to heaven right now. He won't be cast out until that nature has ultimately been confirmed by action. But when we're talking about this issue and wondering, well, why does a good God allow evil? Because a good God isn't going to eliminate competition. That's the whole point. If angels can say no, God will respect that decision. But note as well, if the angels couldn't say no, well, then they never had a choice to begin with, and they were just created essentially as furniture that are meant to serve a purpose,
Robots,
but not else.
yeah.
Now, that wasn't the reason God created the angels, nor was it the reason he created us. And if you are going to argue with our design, that's another question. But the question as to how evil showed up, it was a necessary aspect, a potential hazard of achieving the highest good. And William Lane Craig actually phrased it this way. There were three kinds of worlds that God could have made. A world where there was no potential for evil, in which case only he would exist. A world where there was no option but to choose evil, in which case none of us would have free will or agency. We'd all just be moist robots, essentially. A fourth would be just to create no world, but that kind of ties into the first. And then the third was to create a world where the potential for evil could happen, but also the potential for love. And because love is the highest virtue according to God, he chose to create the best possible world. That included the potential for evil as well. Yet in Revelation 13 we read that Jesus was the lamb slain from the foundations of the world. God created you and me knowing full well all he'd have to go through to have a relationship with us. He created those who would reject him, but still gave them the opportunity to live the kind of life full of his blessings, full of his goodness, and with the opportunity to choose it. Now people say, but he knew the outcome anyway, which changes nothing. It only shows that God was good even to those who hate him. And this is the real key here. Why would Jesus go to the cross for those he knew would reject him? Not because they were bad, but because he's just that good.
Right.
And that's the point that we need to understand. First, what is evil? Second, how did it come to be? And third, how does that apply to you and me? Well, in a sense, all evil is just God respecting our decisions and the consequences thereof. If you don't want God, he won't force himself upon you. But note as well that God can't give us, as C.S. Lewis said, a goodness and a joy, essentially, apart from himself, because it does not exist. There is no such thing. So when we're understanding what God is, not who, but what God is, good itself, when we understand what evil is, not a thing apart from God, like some dark side of the force or whatever, but an actual absence of what good is, and good is God's nature, then God allowing evil to exist is the ultimate complement to his creation. He will respect their ability to reject him. Why? Because he created a world where the greatest possible good could exist, and that was love. If no evil could exist, love couldn't either. If no good could exist, or nothing but good could exist, only God would exist. But because God wanted to create us with the free agency to receive and enjoy his love, just like the angels, he also respected their decision to reject it because it's built into the system.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that is clarifying in all of this is that, Michael, evil isn't something in of itself. All any evil action is taking something good and twisting it. When you think of, for instance, the idea of the Nazis and the Holocaust, and why did they exterminate the Jews? Well, they didn't come to the people and say, oh, well, we want to act in a horrific, hateful way and just eliminate all these people because, they're human beings we don't particularly like, and they're a great scapegoat, and we're going to blame everything on them. They didn't do that. They said, well, these aren't humans anymore. They used the intellect that God gave them in a twisted way to create this mindset and appeal to something that was good. The idea that we want a world without conflict. We want a world where people are at peace and blessed and prosperous. The pathway to that was suggested was absolutely horrific and satanic. But you see the twistedness that's involved with all of this. For the German prison guard at say, Dachau or Auschwitz, why would they stand guard? Well, they could sit there and say, well, it's a good thing for me to obey the law of the land. Yeah, unless, of course, as the Bible says, the law of the land tells us to do something that is absolutely opposed to the morality of God. So you take something good, this desire to obey the law of the land, and you twist it and you use it for evil ends. The list goes on and on. And so when evil manifests itself, that's what we see. When someone murders, what they do is they act as the ultimate judge. Is it wrong to act as an ultimate judge? Should evil be punished? Yeah, evil should be punished. But when we act as the ultimate judge, we are doing something that we were never created to do. Something good gets twisted, so to speak. We exalt ourselves to be God instead of his children. That's a twisting that goes on. So hopefully that provides some clarity there. Question from Caroline. Caroline, thank you for checking on in. It says, hi guys, what does the moon under the woman's feet stand for in the book of Revelation chapter 12 and verse 1? Well, why don't you read Revelation chapter 12 and verse 1 for us, Sean?
Great sign appeared in heaven, great and marvelous, a woman who was clothed with the sun. The moon was under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars, and she cried out in labor and pain to give birth.
Okay, so, this is one of those, book of Revelation. Is this literal or is this symbolic?
A great sign appeared in heaven, great and marvelous.
Okay, so a great sign, right? What is a sign? A sign is something that points to a greater reality. It's something we can see that represents something that we can't, right? Mm-hmm. So we're definitely getting into symbolism there. What are the symbols that are associated with this woman?
Well, I read verses 2 and 3 and onward, and it seems to just move on to the next pair of symbols, also left unexplained, as if we should already know them.
Yeah, okay, so let's focus in on the first set of symbols. What are the first set of symbols? How is the woman described?
Well, first and foremost, she's female.
She's a woman.
So she can give birth. That's important.
Okay.
Second, we have her clothed in the sun. The moon is under her feet, and on her head a garland or a tiara of 12 stars.
Okay, so how in the world are we going to possibly interpret that? Well,
I recall those mentioned elsewhere.
When all else fails in the book of Revelation, it's kind of like the Tom Bradley International Terminal at LAX. I mean, everything from the rest of the Bible seems to either land there or fly there, one of the two. And in Revelation chapter 37, we are told about the dreams that Joseph had. He had a dream and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more, saying, please hear this dream which I've dreamed, that we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and his words. But wait, it's going to get even more intense. Verse 9, then he dreamed and still another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, look, I've dreamed another dream. At this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Well, we need to keep that matter in mind if we're going to understand Revelation 12, right? How does that interpret that passage?
Well, he literally just told Joseph what those symbols meant. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars, excluding the 12th, because they were bowing down to Joseph,
yeah.
would be inclusive, the 12 tribes of Israel. But note this as well. The sun and the moon. Well, the sun is the greater light and the moon is the lesser night. Just noting from a human perspective, these symbols would have been applied to the only people not mentioned as stars, since there were 12 brothers, but there weren't 12 moms, unless you're Solomon, or 12 fathers. So the father or the mother would have been the sun or the moon. Now, if you're going to make the patriarchal assumption, Jacob was probably the son. So to answer your question, Carolyn, the moon would have been the mother of the majority, at least, of the 12 tribes of Israel. Leah.
Well, the mother of, actually, I think it's Rachel, because remember he says, your mother, speaking to Joseph.
Right, and there's another
Rachel,
prophecy in Jeremiah where it notes Rachel weeping for her children because they are no more.
Yeah.
But noting that it's the mother of the 12 tribes, since Jacob had 2 and also their maids were involved, it's a whole big mess. But
so back to Revelation 12, looking at these symbols, we really don't have any other conclusion. It's not the Virgin Mary.
Ooh.
It's not the church in all of its glory. It's who?
It's essentially it's the whole symbol. It's the nation of Israel.
And how is that confirmed in Revelation 12?
Well, you keep reading, and when she gives birth to the male child, they make another reference to Psalm 2, where it says the child will rule all nations with a rod of iron. Well, that's messianic. That's referring to the Messiah coming out of, literally, the nation of Israel. Now, you could say it would apply most specifically to Mary, but note that there aren't any correlations with the dragon wanting to spew out a river, which is a reference to the Gentile nations, to consume her, given 2 wings like an eagle to give her refuge from the dragon. Mary wasn't taken and given refuge from the enemy.
Yeah.
Note we can explain that symbol too. It's in reference to Daniel, if you're wondering. But all these things fall in line with the nation of Israel as a whole. If we try to read into dogma or our presuppositions, that's getting the cart before the horse. But if, on the other hand, we read the text plainly and try to find other more direct statements in Scripture, we don't have to go to Ezekiel or Ruth or any of these other places. We go to the first book of the Bible and find this example, this symbol, given to us not only directly, but also explained in detail right after it's given. Now we should take that and apply the first book of the Bible also to the last. Why? Well, that's just common sense when it comes to reading anything. If they make a reference in the first book and it comes up again in the last, well, all sequels do that.
Yeah.
And so that's how we should take the text.
Yeah. So, again, Caroline, one of the things we really want to point out to you there is that as you read through the book of Revelation and you come across a symbol, either that symbol is going to be explained immediately, and we're going to be told exactly what it means. Read through Revelation chapter 1, great example of that, where, the symbols that we see, especially about Jesus and the lampstands and so forth, these things are very meticulously explained for us there. If it's not explained there, it's going to be because it's been explained elsewhere, and that's where we have to do a little biblical detective work.
Yeah, the jasper and the sardius stone in appearance, that was a reference to the high priest. One like a son of man, that was a reference to Daniel.
And I mean, that jasper and sardius stone is really a powerful thing as well, because on the high priest's breastplate, the first stone, there were 12 stones, each stone representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The first stone represented the tribe of Reuben. Now, the name Reuben literally means, behold, a son. And then the last stone is a sardius stone, which represents the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin was not his original given name. He was called Benoni, the son of my sorrow. Jacob changed the name to the son of my right hand. So, this beautiful picture of Jesus in his totality as his glory is revealed, as John is caught up into the heavenly throne room.
And if you're ever confused about that as well, he goes on to explain, do not be afraid, I am the first and the last, reference to Isaiah. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. Well, there's only one person in the Bible that was resurrected to live forevermore in that sense, so this would be Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's not difficult. It's just made complicated by people who want to sell something.
Well,
So,
and the other thing that's wonderful about this, Caroline, is you start taking these things apart and using the Bible to interpret the Bible. The Bible is the single best commentary I've ever found on itself. You're going to, not only by reading through the book of Revelation, get an Old Testament education, but you're also going to be edified because you're going to have that totality of God's revelation. You're going to see that the Bible is one seamless whole. It's not this part and that part, or this book and that book. Properly understood, we see the plan of salvation from beginning to end. So it's very exciting.
Yep. All right, got another question here from Tom, who wants to know about Jonah and the whale in reference to the sign of Jonah. Was that real or a fable, and does it really matter either way? Well, Tom, it kind of does, because when the Bible presents itself as history as opposed to poetry or to prophecy, there needs to be a level of respect given not only to properly understand the themes, but to take them as seriously as they were meant to. If I take the account of Jonah as a fable, there's one of two reasons I'm doing that. I'm either A, discounting the possibility of miracles for the sake of social standards, or I'm rejecting the claims of the Bible to be actual statements, actual events. It's either a discrediting of God or the discrediting of the Bible to actually be telling us what happened, what people did, and why. Now, here's an important thing for us to understand. What would give us reason to believe that Jonah took place in history? Because note, while it isn't in the historical section of the Old Testament, it does give us historical material to work with. We have people, we have places, and we have things that we can test not only in but outside of the Bible itself. The first one?
Yeah, right off the get-go, we find that Jonah was related to someone.
Yeah, we have the son of Amittai. Now, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it.
Amittai.
But is that an individual we should be familiar with?
Well, Amittai, perhaps not, but Jonah, the son of Amittai, is described in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 14 and verse 25, as being the prophet who was from Gath-Hepher, who made a prophecy that was fulfilled during the ministry that Jonah had during the reign of King Jeroboam II.
Who was also a testable individual.
Right, another historical individual. The rise of the Assyrian Empire, Nineveh being its capital, and Jonah's reluctance to be able to share with the Ninevites is also a dead giveaway here, because first of all, we would see that although under Jeroboam II, Israel prospered financially and materially and militarily, almost expanding to the levels that Solomon enjoyed, but spiritually they were dead as doornails. And Jonah was smart enough to do the math and realize that if that kept up, the judgment was coming. He could see the handwriting on the wall, especially with the rise of the Assyrian Empire under the Ninevites. So
that also sets a date, because we do know when the Assyrians were rounding up people, and we also know when they fell. We have a date set as far as when this could have taken place.
Right.
The reign of Jeroboam and the time of the Assyrians.
Yeah, Jeroboam the second Israeli king along that line. It was, in a sense, a foreshadowing of what would eventually take down the northern 10 tribes. The Assyrians would come in and wipe them out. They almost wiped out the southern 2 tribes, but God intervened. So, when we get to the point of should I say the elephant or the whale in the room? The fact that Jonah was swallowed by a great fish. It says the Lord prepared this fish, and that Jonah was somehow kept alive under these set of circumstances. Bible commentators like J. Vernon McGee would say that it's very possible that Jonah might have died and been resurrected as far as being in the stomach of the great whale, because he speaks in Jonah chapter 2 about going down to the gates of Sheol and so forth, and all of this. Now that can be poetic, a poetic way of what a trip on the friendly cruise ship whale belly would be like. From what I understand, a whale's bodily temperature is about 106 degrees. If you're in that stomach, you're sloshing around with all kinds of rotting fish and things that the whale has already eaten.
But that's not inconsistent, because people are allowed to, in history, speak poetically.
Yeah. So whether that is, again, a resurrection, whether God preserved him alive, these sort of things line up. Now, when we say, Jonah and the whale, that's a fairy tale. Well, it could be a fairy tale, but A, we're talking about a very real person who lived in a very real time, under very real circumstances, who is behaving in a very ungodly kind of a way. The end of the book of Jonah shows that Jonah didn't care about people. He cared more about his own creature comforts than the fate of 120,000 children who lived in Nineveh.
And generally, when you're trying to make something fanciful, you present your side in the best possible light and the others in the worst. Yet, who are the righteous ones in Jonah, and who is the fool?
Yeah, the least likely individuals from a Jewish mind to turn and worship God in a way that was pleasing to him were the Ninevites, and they are the ones who did it. The most likely individual was Jonah, and even though God gave him the school of hard knocks in Whale Belly University, and he did reluctantly go and say, yet 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. This has been called the world's greatest revival with the world's worst evangelist. Even though all of these things happened, at the end of it, we don't even know if Jonah got the message, because it's an open question. We don't know if Jonah ever came away to God's way of thinking. So a fable seems to defy all of that. But what's the real kicker?
Well, the real kicker is not only the people, place, and things that we've mentioned, not only the accounts of embarrassment, which is what historians look for, but even more importantly, the only reason you would have to dismiss this as history isn't because it makes up fictional places like Tarshish and Joppa and Nineveh, because those are real places we can test and discover. Not because of fictional people, because they're mentioned elsewhere in a historical context. I see 2 Kings right there. But also because it's underestimating, essentially, what God is capable of. And if we're going to ask the question, why is it that I should take this as history? Well, because God himself quoted it as such. When Jesus of Nazareth was on this earth, he said, and reference to what was already mentioned in the sign of the prophet Jonah, he didn't say it was the fable. He referenced Jonah as if he was a historical figure. He referenced the part that skeptics have the most trouble with, as if it was the whole point of the reference.
Yeah.
So that's why we wouldn't take Jonah as a fable, because secular historian standards approve of it.
Yep.
Second, because it mentions real people, real places, and real things we can verify outside of the book of Jonah and the Bible itself. And third, because Jesus believed it. And if I'm going to listen to anyone about history, I'd say the one who was there.
Yeah. Another interesting question here from John. John wants to know, with all the prophecy that seems to be being fulfilled today, what is the best biblical explanation for the doctrine of the imminent return of Jesus?
It's passing directly from my head as far as verse, but I know in Matthew 24, God bless you, Jesus mentioned the sign of the olive tree, though you see its branches
fig tree.
Yeah, the fig tree. It was going to show that it was probably signed for harvest. You're not going to know the exact time because they didn't have their Google Calendar available at them at all times. But they knew based off of the signs of the times, the seasons, that they could know the time of the Lord's return was coming. Now, this was first and foremost in context referencing the time of the Messiah's first coming that the Pharisees missed. But I think it can also be applied because Jesus goes on to say, you will not know the time of the coming of the Lord. Matthew 24 through 26 is very, very heavy on these sort of themes.
Yeah, and I guess in a nutshell, we could talk a lot about why the doctrine of imminency, that Jesus reserves the right to come at any time, that there's no prophecy of Scripture that needs to be fulfilled prior to the time that Jesus would come. But the real kicker is in verse 42. It says, "Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect." Well, that's imminency in a nutshell. That also, I think, is pretty compelling evidence that this event called the rapture, where Jesus comes back for his people, is going to happen before the tribulation period. Because once the tribulation period starts, that final 7 years kicked off when the Antichrist signs a strong covenant with many nations for 7 years. Well, if you're in the tribulation period and you see this worldwide leader entering into this covenant that allows the Jews to rebuild their temple on their historic site, you could start counting down the days. You would know when Jesus was going to return. Jesus also said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where he ought not. And then we have this other warning there, let the reader understand. Again, in the book of Daniel, we're told that from the time this abomination is set up to the culmination of the kingdom is 1,290 days. So you watching the news, you see this guy going to the temple declaring himself as God, you can know the day that Jesus is physically going to return to earth. What day do we not know of? When he comes for his people to snatch us out before the storm. And he uses the analogy of Noah and the ark and Lot and his wife and so on, and the idea that people are going to be going about their day-to-day business, buying and selling, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and then suddenly sudden destruction comes upon them. Same thing's going to happen. Well, that's why I don't think we see this either at the midway point of the tribulation or at the end, because when, for instance, the end of the tribulation, nobody's going to be renting out a wedding hall. Nobody's going to be, trying to complete a real estate deal when all the real estate on earth is getting burned up. As far as a mid-trib position, you really run into trouble there, because if it's mid-trib, as soon as the Antichrist signs that peace treaty, you can start counting down. And Jesus said no one would know the day or the hour. So in a nutshell, those are some of the more compelling reasons, and we could go on with others, as to why we could expect the Lord to return even before this broadcast gets done. He reserves the right to do that.
So note those passages and others noted in Mark and Luke. But as far as that understanding that Jesus' return is soon, I think the best and greatest sign is Israel itself, that they are back in the land. But note, we need to keep a weather eye and also stay busy, because we don't know when that exactly will be. Finishing up?
Yeah, another question here from Sean, not our Sean, but another Sean. It says, good evening, gentlemen. Got a question. So recently my video of me doing a Bible study got rejected from a church page on Facebook because the pastor said I didn't use the correct Bible. He said their church page, I'm only allowed to read out of the King James Version. My Bible I used was a New King James. What are your guys' opinion on Bible translations and King James onlyist Christians? Thank you.
That's all that you can really say.
Well, let's deal with the issue. King James only movement essentially says that the King James 1607 version, or
1611, only way to heaven. That's the slogan.
Yeah, 1611 version of the Bible is the only inspired version of the Bible. It is called the Authorized Version. It was based on a manuscript body that was put together by a Dutch theologian named Erasmus. Erasmus tended to use the traditional Eastern texts of the Bible, the Greek text there, and he believed that the traditional was better. But as time went on, more manuscripts of the Bible were discovered. We can compare and contrast and so forth. People that take the King James only version of the Bible, I commend them for wanting to stand for Scripture. But what we are trying to accomplish with any translation in the Bible, and the King James Version is a translation from the other languages, is to try to get back as closely and accurately as we can to what the originals had to say. When we say the Bible is inerrant, it means that it is without error in the original manuscripts, not in translations, not in even copies that are passed along. Well, we have so much manuscript evidence we can compare and contrast. We don't have to worry about losing that message. But for someone to say you can only use the old King James, I think, Sean, unfortunately, they're more committed to tradition than they are to a solid understanding of what Scripture is all about. So, again, people can have that conviction. It's not going to keep them out of heaven, but you might find a better and more welcoming place to share the Word. Hey, thanks so much for being with us on the broadcast. Back tomorrow for more of your questions on God's inspired Word.
You've been listening to A Reason for Hope. Thank you again for joining us as we continue our journey through God's Word, one question of the heart at a time. Until we meet again, we would love to connect with you. You can text or email your questions to questionsforhope@gmail.com. You can also find out more about our ministry at calvarychristianfellowship.com. And be sure to join us next time on A Reason for Hope. A Reason for Hope is an outreach ministry of Calvary Christian Fellowship in Tucson, Arizona.